Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, wherever you are all around the world. This is Dr. Teresa Canada, the host of the Silk Stocking Sisters podcast. And we're back again with another episode with another special guest. As you know, all my guests are special. And again, we have a very special guest, Miss Rosa Blackwell. And today's episode will talk about the experience of being a student, an administrator, a teacher in the Cincinnati Public Schools in Cincinnati, Ohio. So let me give an introduction to my guest for today. Miss Rosa Blackwell was one of 7 children, born a proud coal miner's daughter in the mountains of West Virginia. At an early age, her family relocated to Cincinnati, Ohio, where she attended Cincinnati Public Schools, and later served as a teacher, supervisor, elementary, and high school principal. She also provided teacher and administrator professional development prior to becoming the Cincinnati Public Schools superintendent. She retired after 36 years in the district that greatly influenced her overall growth and well-being. Throughout her career, she was greatly influenced by her father's attention to and stressing the importance of laying a foundation of faith, family, and work ethic in his children. And teachers and administrators in her formative years believed that all children deserve respect and high educational standards. Blackwell learned from her role models and passed on to those with whom she worked that in the schoolhouses, adults controlled the conditions. She strongly emphasized that adults had the responsibility to never allow excuses to be the reason that children become victims of low expectations. Ms. Rosa Blackwell received her undergraduate and graduate degrees from Xavier University, Cincinnati, Ohio. Welcome, Ms. Blackwell.
Thank you so much, and good afternoon to you.
Let me just preface our conversation by telling the audience how we met. For those of you who know me or have heard one of my podcasts in the past, I spoke about my experience of working in the Northwest Local School District, which is outside of Cincinnati, which is a suburb of Cincinnati, Ohio, which many people didn't know. I lived in Ohio. But also the fact that I knew people who lived in Cincinnati. And one of them was now the current state senator from the Cincinnati district, Kathy Ingram. And Kathy Ingram and I met years ago when I was in Cincinnati, but she and my sister were classmates in college. And that's how I got to know Miss Ingram, or I should say Senator Ingram. So I said to Senator Ingram, I said, I need to know somebody from Cincinnati Public Schools. She said, you got to call Miss Rosa. You got to call Miss Rosa. I said, okay, all right. So that's how Miss Rosa Blackwell and I connected, through our mutual friend. And I think Miss Rosa can tell us a little bit about how she knew Miss Ingram with her experience working on in the Cincinnati Public Schools. So Miss Blackwell, can you start with that first?
Certainly. Kathy and I will, if you don't mind, just refer to her as Kathy. We actually had known each other for years. However, she became a member of the Cincinnati School Board. And that's where we really got to know each other quite well, working very hard to ensure that all of the children, parents, and the overall community could have the best school system available to them. We worked hard every day with Kathy's knowledge and expertise to ensure that our young people had the success that they were entitled to.
Now, can you give us a time frame when that was?
Well, I began my career in Cincinnati in the early 70s. Kathy and became a school board member in the early 2000s, thereabout. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I've been retired for a little while, so it's been a time since we really worked together.
Okay, because I want to get that, because I recall, like I said, to mention to you that I recall when she had to come into New York City for a meeting and so forth. I kind of hosted her for dinner one evening, she and some other, I think, school board members who were also in town. That's when I knew of her involvement on the school boards at the time. Mm-hmm. She was very active and so forth and so on. So I know that, preceded what she's doing now, but that was part of one of her valued experiences of being involved heavily in Cincinnati Public Schools. So that was really helpful. I think that that would help me give it an idea of how your relationship is important. You see that it assisted her. She assisted you with some issues of work jointly on issues. So can you tell us a little bit about how you came into Cincinnati starting as a student and how you went all the way up the road?
Sure. I was born, as you indicated, in the mountains of West Virginia. My father, who was a coal miner, worked for many years there. However, the coal mines began to close down and he needed to look elsewhere for work. He had a sister in Cincinnati, and therefore that's where we relocated. And I began in the early elementary grades, grade 3 to be exact. And from there, went all the way through Cincinnati Public as a student. And then I got my undergrad and graduate degrees at Xavier University, which also is in Cincinnati. And then returned to Cincinnati as I started out as a sub because I was working on my master's.
Okay.
And from there, I became a teacher, and later I was a supervisor and worked on professional development with the teachers and administrators, and was asked to join a group who provided in-service to the teachers and administrators in the district. And then later, the superintendent at that time, his name was Michael Brandt, he asked that I join his team as the deputy superintendent. And I served in that role for many years. I basically oversaw the day-to-day operations of the district. And then later I became the superintendent.
Okay, now let me ask this question. Since my book talked about the segregation and integration in North and Midwest, that's the focus I want to focus on in this podcast. Can you give me an example or give me some experiences that you had when you first attended public schools and how it was in terms of the ethnic backgrounds and the relationships that were existing at the time?
Yeah, sure. For the most part, when I began in Cincinnati Public and throughout a good portion of the years as a student, it was a segregated district. So I attended schools in my neighborhood, all Black. Every now and then we would have a Caucasian student that would pass through. The thing that was notable to me was that at that time, it was in the 70s, the teachers and administrators lived in the neighborhood.
Okay.
So as students, we knew well what we should and should not do, because it was, a given that sometimes our teachers might run into our parents or uncles or grandparents
Exactly.
at the grocery store. And so we definitely did not want to have any bad news come from the teachers to our parents or whomever.
Right,
So
right.
it was an interesting time. I had white teachers as we went up through the grades, especially in the high school and also in the junior high school. And what I shall always remember, and my husband and I were students at the same time, and we still to this day talk about how when we were coming up, the teachers worked very hard to make sure that we had the best education possible. Mm-hmm. Even though we did not have much in terms of material things, we had the things that really made the greatest difference.
And what were those?
Faith. We got that from my dad.
Okay.
It was reinforced in quiet ways within the schools, not publicly, but they knew how we were raised.
Right.
Family and work ethic. And our teachers, again, even though we may not have had a whole lot, they did not allow what we didn't have to be excuses for what we couldn't do. They expected the very best from us, and they gave us their very best. Again, although we had minority teachers, Black teachers, white teachers, and everyone shared the same beliefs that no matter, although we came from challenging situations, and that's not to minimize where we came from, they were real. Within the schoolhouses, they controlled the conditions. They created that environment. where we felt loved and valued. And they set for us the examples of working hard and not giving up. And that was my experience as a student. And so when I became a teacher and then later an administrator, I carried those same values with me in the
Okay.
school.
Okay. Okay. Well, let me ask the question then, because it's interesting. One of the discussions, like I said, my experience was having to go through the desegregation process in New York City and how traumatic it was, and how I had left my Harlem community going into the school. And I had a Black teacher who expected this, what you described was very much typical of what she felt, how I felt about her teaching and her being there in the classroom and having lost that going to this desegregated school situation. And the lack of support that was provided me and my classmates, especially my class, the black and brown classmates, and we didn't have that same kind of support and encouragement. We went to this new school, so I'm thinking about
that's because you were a student in a desegregated environment. Keep in
Yes.
mind, when I was a student, it was a segregated, for the most part, it was a segregated district, and so I did not have to do what later the young students that I taught had to experience, because later in the 70s, well, not shortly after I became a teacher, the board at that time passed a motion where we had to desegregate the school district.
And what year was that about?
The youngsters whom I worked with had to get on the buses and go
Okay.
elsewhere.
Okay.
Now, I will tell you, it was my personal belief that that was not the best thing that could have happened for them. And I say that because I never ever believed that the proper training and experiences that adults needed to have in order to work with children who came from different backgrounds was provided. And I think that my suspicion was that the expectations were quite different.
In what ways?
This is me speaking. I don't have
Yeah, well, I mean, and from that, I want to hear your perspective. That's it, your
well,
perspective.
because, well, you pretty much go on what you've heard and what you think situations are like for those people whom you've never had experiences with.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that unless you have that system and structures in place to help the teachers who were receiving minority students, they pretty much probably continued to work the way they had worked before. In other words, probably the students whom they had in their schoolhouses were, for the most part, students that they knew.
Right.
So they knew how they learned and what the expectation should be for those students. I don't know that they really got a good understanding of the students who got on those buses and came to those classrooms, what their backgrounds were and what the experiences were for those children, and how to ready their classrooms to accept those children. That's just my suspicion.
But do you think it mattered to them? That's my question. Do you think it mattered?
I think that it mattered for the teachers who were given the assignment to receive the minority students.
Right.
Let me say this to you very honestly. I think that for some it mattered.
Okay.
And I think that for others, they were doing a job that they were given to do.
Okay. Okay.
And so, the experiences of the students who sat in those classrooms probably was not as it was in the neighborhoods that they had come from, where those teachers really knew them and held them accountable and expected that they do well. That's just something that I believe, only because, even as we think of today and how we ready adults to work with our children, I don't know that we've done the best job of preparing the teachers and administrators to receive children who come from different backgrounds. So I'm just basing my suspicions on what I've experienced and what I've seen just in the world that we live in.
Well, let me just tell you, professor
just,
now teaching people who want to become teachers. That's not, I understand what you're saying, but I hear you, because I too sense what you just said happening as we speak for the last several, I don't see the training and preparation for these teachers who are going to be working in these, backgrounds with different people. I don't believe they're being, you're going through the credentials and so forth and so on. But what did you describe? How can you teach people to be open and receptive to all people? Is there a way that could be done, you think?
I think that it is possible for adults to become aware of the skill sets that are necessary to receive the students whom they serve.
Okay.
That to me means that you have a mixture of backgrounds at the adult level working together. So going back to my time as a young teacher, we had to integrate not only the students, but the teaching staff as well. And, having Black teachers and white teachers working together, we learned a lot about each other and how to interact with the students that we, were responsible for.
Right.
So I taught in a team situation. So the teachers will come together every day to plan their lessons. But we also worked to think about what the students needed as we prepared those lessons. And so having a mixed setting, Black teachers and white teachers talking together and understanding what the students needed, that's how you learn to meet the needs of students, talking, sharing. Some teachers may know something about the families that others didn't. So you pass on the information to just get a better understanding of what the children's backgrounds were and where they're coming from. You may even have known the parents or the grandparents.
Right.
And
What's
so you can talk about, it's just different, but I work with educators, white teachers who were outstanding, not all of them, but I will tell you, I work with some Black teachers who were outstanding, not all of them.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't want us to get into this mindset that, it has to be a certain color to bring to the table to meet the needs of whatever group you're working with in terms of children, Black or white. You have to understand that the children whom you serve, and I come with that belief, we serve the children and their families. And
where they are, where they come with and everything else, correct?
And we have the responsibility for making sure that every child that walks into our classroom or our schoolhouse, we see them as someone whom we owe every opportunity to be successful. We do not lower standards. We set high standards and expectations, but we build that support system to help the children to do well. And again, going back to what I was referencing earlier, I just don't know if that environment or that attitude or that belief system was in place when we began to integrate our schools.
Yeah. Okay, so Cincinnati Public Schools started that integration process like in the early 70s?
In the early 70s. And again, it began with the board passing, the motion to integrate, to desegregate. Now, later in the early 80s, the board, the community, state of Ohio, through the education system, they agreed to a different model of integrating the system. Okay. Busing was not necessarily the only option that was out there. We were given the opportunity to integrate our schools through what we call magnet programs.
Oh, magnet school.
Instead of forced busing, we created programs where we could attract different children, Black children and white children. We integrated that way.
Right.
So I think by then there was far more training and an understanding of what needed to be in place to certain degrees were addressed. So it was different. It was different. Because I will tell you, when we first desegregated, people were not happy. And even the teachers, teachers had to be reassigned.
Oh, really? They reassigned teachers?
Absolutely. Teachers had to be reassigned. Some had to go to white schools, and some white teachers had to come to the, city schools who had not worked in that environment before. So it was an attitude adjustment that was required, and it took a while.
Yeah.
But as we progressed and again provided alternatives through the magnet system, by then a lot more training and development was in place, and so it helped a lot.
Well, you mentioned something which I was unaware of. When I talked about the New York City school districts, they did not transfer teachers to other schools.
Oh yeah.
They kept the teachers where they were. I mean, literally, whatever the composition of the educators were at the time, they stayed, they remained there. They did not transfer, and let me just explain this. My situation, this is why I wrote the book, wasn't a typical busing. I did not get bused on a yellow school bus to go to school. And the fact that there were students who were bused to different schools on yellow school buses, but that was not my experience. And I talk about that in terms of the experiences that schools that were more prestigious. Like the school that I ended up attending at 4th grade was a very prestigious public elementary school in New York City, and to this day it still is. And they chose the students who were going to come to their school. They didn't want just any Black child or brown child to come. They wanted specific ones with certain academic.
And picked them, huh?
Okay, so this was that was very unique in a situation such as that. Where you're sharing with me, which I'm thinking about, if we can just segue a little bit about what took place in the South. I don't want to talk about a lot of stuff in the South, everybody kind of knows that. But in the South, you talk about how Black teachers and Black administrators really pretty much lost their positions, because when they decided to integrate the schools, they no longer had those positions. They did not make those principals of predominantly white schools. They did not put a lot of Black teachers into the predominantly white schools. And they did not send any white teachers to the Black schools. So the Black schools closed in the South. Now, you're saying an experience that took place in the Midwest, in Cincinnati, where they actually, this is the first that I've known this. I'm glad the audience is hearing this. This is the first I've heard of this.
Yeah, I could really, at this point, can't remember what the formula was, but a certain percent of teachers. So, for example, in the school where I started teaching, some of my good buddies they had less, and they did it on a seniority basis. So some of the teachers were reassigned based on seniority. And I don't know what the formula was. I can't remember what the formula was in terms of the assignment to the other schools, but that's how it happened. So you may end up as a Black student in a totally different setting, predominantly white. And there might have been less than a handful of Black teachers who maybe were there. So, and I again, it's been so long, I don't remember, and I should probably have looked up that information for you, but that we kind of digress a little bit. So, I can't tell you specifically what those.
But I didn't even know there was such a thing. I mean,
absolutely. So we had some white teachers who came to the school where I was, and again, we were in a team setting, and we worked hard, but it didn't matter. We weren't there to play, and every one of the adults in that building, we held each other accountable, and that's a different thing too.
That's important.
I grew up in a district. I was a teacher. I was a union member, and at that time, we didn't need the union to tell us what to do. Within that school building, we had administrators who we all shared common beliefs about what the children needed. And together we worked hard to provide for them. And I will say to you without hesitation that it didn't matter, Black, white, we all held each other accountable. We didn't need anybody else coming in to tell us what needed to happen, because we cared about our children. And we knew that the parents and grandparents and uncles and aunts, whomever, depended on us to give to our children. They sent them to us, so we saw them as our children. The best that was available. And That's what we did. And that's the attitude that I carried into every experience that I had working in Cincinnati Public Schools. And I never worked in in any other district.
So you attended and you became a teacher and an administrator in the same district where you
That's
started.
right. Absolutely.
So can you give me like a little summary in terms of how you felt doing that? Do you think that it made a difference in terms of how you taught and how you administered?
Working in the same school district?
No, just having been a student, actual student as a in the public schools and going up the ranks, becoming not only just did you graduate from the Cincinnati Public Schools, but you also became a teacher and administrator. Can you explain to me, because I mean, many people, that's very highly unusual in many, especially many cities. So I want you to give this assessment of your thoughts of, do you think it made a difference, you having been a student, having gone up the ranks,
I do
as
not.
opposed to coming outside, from outside coming in?
No, not for me. It didn't. Again, going back to my belief system, I think it would have been the same if I had been moved, if I had been one of the teachers who was reassigned to another school at a suburb. My attitude for the children whom I served would have been the same. Again, all that I have had to give them was based on what my belief systems were. Like starting back to when, I was a youngster with coming from home. My father had a 3rd grade education, 7 children. My mother died when I was 11 years old. My father, my grandmother, and my mother's siblings and the older siblings that I had together, they worked hard to take care of the younger children, my brothers and me. So we had nothing but people who said we were going to do well. They expected that from us. So, and they helped us to understand that we did not have the right to deprive anybody else of the same opportunities. And so it would not have mattered to me. It really would not. I was honored. I was honored to have been given the opportunity to first be a student and then a staff member in Cincinnati Public and later to be the superintendent. I considered it quite a blessing. And I'm not confused.
Okay.
It was absolutely a blessing. But my attitude about teaching and learning, it would not have changed. Not at
Great. Thank you for sharing that. I know our time is winding down, but I just want to thank you for sharing that, because I think that saying that people understand you can still provide the best. And a lot of it comes from, the involvement, the parent involvement, home environment, and in case, the faith and foundation. Those are all characteristics that probably added on to your emphasis in terms of being who you are and how you became in your professional and personal life. So what can you say as we close that you look forward to in the future? What do you think some of the things that you could think about that you can give some insight, or what you would like to see maybe moving forward in our public school system, especially in the North and Midwest?
Well, for me, again, having been retired for quite some time, I really worked hard not to pay too much attention to what's going on in the district that I work so hard to help to contribute to. But I will say this to you. The times that we are living in now, in my opinion, are most concerning. Our young people are so very precious. And I do believe that as adults, we're letting them down in many, many ways.
Yeah.
So I am hopeful that somewhere, somehow, we will really come together as adults and understand that our young people need from us everything that we can give them to help them to be successful. And that means stop allowing our young people to think they're adults when they're still children. Putting structures in place that help them to understand that they're not going to be hanging out there by themselves, that they're adults who are not going to write them off. They're adults who are not going to come with a belief system of low expectations where we don't believe that they can do well. I'm hoping that together we will just work very hard to just figure out how to save our children. And as we do that, the entire community, this entire country will benefit. We're
Absolutely.
not in the business of letting our kids down. There are too many adults who are now going around lowering expectations in the schoolhouses. And I find it very resentful, to be honest with you. We don't need to lower our standards. We need to work hard and help our young people to reach those high standards so that they too can have the same opportunities to be successful that we have been given.
Exactly.
I'm hopeful.
I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad to hear. Thank you for those final words of encouragement. Hopefully the audience will take that and listen to some of the things that you experienced and your words of wisdom, having had that experience and leaving something moving forward. So I'm hopeful as well that we can do that. We all take heed to what you've mentioned. It should make the world of a difference. So here we are again. I want to thank my guest, Miss Rosa Blackwell, for coming in and just talking and sharing her stories and her lifestyle in terms of her beliefs and values that she's espoused throughout her own career and continues to do that in some form or fashion today, and leaving those words of wisdom with this audience. And if you want to get in touch with her, contact me and I'll connect you with Miss Blackwell. But I just want to thank her so much for sharing with us today and having this wonderful conversation about the hope for the future as well. So this is another episode of the Silk Stocking Sisters podcast, and we'll see you again next time. Have a great day, evening, wherever you are around the world. Bye now.